Welcome to day 2 of Opening to Deeper Intimacy. Today we're going into fears and energetic blocks around what actually prevents us from leaning into that deeper intimacy. So I just want to take a few moments just to drop in, so feel free to close down the eyes, and we're just going to take some deep breaths. Allowing yourself to sigh, to tone, to move on each exhale, and really dropping into your body here. Noticing the sensations that are present for you. Is such a foundational practice of coming into deep self-intimacy, is really connecting to your body. As we were talking about yesterday in day 1, we were talking about really the foundations of intimacy with another is really that intimacy with yourself and that intimacy with your felt sense experience. Because as you begin to open into deeper intimacy, you're going to notice that there's going to be a lot more sensation in the body. And so we want to really expand our capacity to feel those sensations. And that's really the gateway. That's really what's going to allow you to experience more connection and love and intimacy and joy and pleasure and all the things that you really desire to feel. It's also going to expand your capacity to be with the things that are uncomfortable and maybe the things that we don't really want to feel. And why we want to do that as well is yesterday I was speaking about triggers and the uncomfortable things that come up in the process. And if we have been in a state of avoiding and suppressing and pushing that away, that's also going to be really intense for the body to hold and to feel and to move through. And so we'll notice ourselves consistently just pushing it away, avoiding it. And that's actually what creates this stuckness and this stagnation and prevents us from really moving into more of the energetic vibrations and emotional states that we really desire to be in. It really prevents us from experiencing greater states of pleasure and joy because we're spending so much of our energy avoiding feeling the grief and the shame and the guilt or whatever it might be, that we're actually blocking ourselves from our aliveness and from feeling. So I invite you to take a few more deep breaths here. Just leaning in a little bit more, allowing yourself to feel what's here. And for a lot of us, we're going to notice layers of resistance and numbness. Sometimes it's like I can't really feel anything, or I don't really know what I'm feeling. That's another one, is many of us don't have the vocabulary to describe our experience. And so maybe it's starting to expand that, starting to get really curious. What is here for me? What is here for me? Welcome, beautiful people. We've just started with our drop in, so feel free to close the eyes and just take some breaths here. We'll take a few more moments just being with our felt sense. What is here for me? And this is a really powerful practice as we move into today's theme around the fears and the energetic blocks that we may be experiencing when it comes to that deeper intimacy. Because as we start to feel the fear coming up in our life, and maybe in this masterclass, as we start to notice that fear, maybe it's anxiety, maybe it's the resistance, it can start to feel really overwhelming. Yesterday we spoke about triggers. They can feel really overwhelming in the moment. And we can often lose ourselves in these experiences, and we can buy into the stories that come with them. And we lose ourselves, we lose our truth in that moment. And when we come back to the breath and the felt sense, it can really help us to regulate our nervous system, process what we're feeling, and move through it with much more ease. Doesn't mean it's easy, but we're able to move through that without completely losing ourselves. And another really powerful practice that you can do here is, as you're feeling the sensations, actually speak them out loud. And notice what happens when you speak them out loud. Tingling, warmth, my heartbeat is faster. Tension, constriction, tightening. Where are you feeling this in the body? I'm feeling clenching in my jaw or my fist, feeling a tightening in my belly. You may also notice sensations that are pleasurable or pleasant. Maybe there's a bit of a softening, energy flowing through your body. Especially as you come into this practice and you start to really be aware of what's going on inside of yourself, you might be surprised that as you sit with the uncomfortable, you actually start to notice that there's so much more going on inside of you. And there's actually some really pleasant experiences, calming experiences. And you may start to notice that it brings you out of that overwhelm and into deeper connection with yourself and what's really going on. What is my body communicating with me? And as I mentioned just before, this is foundational. This is really the foundations that will allow you to experience that deeper intimacy. So it might seem simple. It may even be something that you're already aware of or already practice, but we can never practice this enough. Even myself, this is something I've been practicing for about 5 years, and I continue to practice it. And I'm continuously mind blown how powerful this simple practice is. There are so many practices that we can utilize, and my toolbox has just skyrocketed in the past few years. But this simple practice is one that I will always come back to. Especially in those times where we're starting to notice, like, oh, there's this belief coming up. Oh, there's this fear coming up. Oh, there's this thing that's kind of like a trigger or something that may be coming up as that block. Maybe it's in your relationship. Maybe it's with an emotion that's arising and we can feel ourselves resisting and avoiding. And as we sit with the sensation of that, we can actually start to get really curious. What is really going on here? What is the fear? What is the block? What is my body communicating with me? And that's where we can do that deeper work, because now we've got the awareness. And as I always say, awareness is the gateway to your transformation. Awareness is your gateway to the transformation. But if we are unwilling to see it and to lean into that, that's where we often get stuck and repeat these patterns, and we find ourselves in this loop. Why isn't it changing? Why am I still experiencing? Why is this coming back up? That's a really big one. Why is this coming back up? I thought I dealt with this. And that can come with feelings around, what am I doing wrong? What is wrong with me? Maybe I'm broken. So I'm just starting to share some of the common ones that I hear a lot. And when we start to think that there's something wrong with us, we'll shut down. If we buy into that story, we start to shut down and protect ourselves from the pain of that. And we don't really feel the pain fully. We might feel like the surface layer of that pain. We might feel really sad in that moment, but we don't feel the fullness of that, of how deeply we have believed in our life that there is something wrong with us, and the pain of that. And as I mentioned yesterday in day one, it was like when we really lean in, when we really allow ourselves to feel what is here fully, it moves. We often will receive very, very deep and profound insights into how this is actually something we learned. It's not something that we were born with. It's actually something that we learned at some point. And we can start this process of unraveling these beliefs, healing these wounds, and integrating, coming back to wholeness. And it's from that place of wholeness that we're able to experience that deep intimacy, that deep connection with ourselves and another. So I'm going to be going into some common fears that come up for people around intimacy, some of the beliefs that come up in patterns. And then we'll start to move into how we can actually overcome these challenges and really start to open up to that deeper intimacy. I would love to check in with you guys. So if you're here with me live, you can pop it in the chat. What are some of the fears or blocks that you, or challenges that you're experiencing when it comes to intimacy? And for those watching the replay, I invite you to either submit your question with the link that I send out in the email, or pop it in one of the recap posts on social media so that I can actually speak directly to you and what's coming up for you and offer you that support. We'll just give a few moments here. If you guys that are live want to share in the chat, what are some of those fears, beliefs, blocks, challenges that are here for you? And just while we're waiting for those to come through, I'll share some of mine that I've experienced in my journey. And it's been really fascinating because, as I said yesterday, I've been on this journey for over a decade now, and it's been very, the word that's coming through is intense. The last 5 years since meeting my partner, Liam, it's like the volume got turned up and I started to see a lot more on a much deeper level at a very exponential rate. And it was just like boom, 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 like all these things coming up. And it was intense. And that's why I really focus a lot of my work on those foundations. It's really fascinating in human design. I'm a 5-1, and we're going to talk a little bit about human design tomorrow. But the one is like that foundational layer of the house analogy that human design uses. And it's like the foundations of the house that holds the house up. And it's also like the investigator. And it's really fascinating because a lot of my work, I'm going into those foundations. So it's actually in my design. And what I love about this piece is this is what we really need in order to hold the house up, in order to really go to that depth, to really expand to higher heights, is to have those strong foundations that are really rooted, where you feel really grounded and supported and secure within yourself, and you can hold the sensation of the experiences that are coming. And when you have a desire, an authentic desire, it is meant for you. The reason you are here, there is a desire, there is something you desire to experience or receive or have in your life, a way that you want to feel. That is meant for you. That's why you have that desire. But like I've been talking about, if we have been numbing out or buying into these stories or avoiding, our capacity to feel those sensations gets smaller and smaller and smaller, as well as if we've got unresolved trauma, unintegrated trauma, our window of tolerance gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And so we're actually doing this work to expand that window so that when we get triggered, we don't shoot out of that window and completely lose ourselves in the overwhelm and the emotion and the story of that. When a story comes up, we don't get swept up and buy into the story as absolute truth. And it can be there, we can feel it. It's not about we just don't have it anymore. It can still be there, but it's a very different experience. And same with our desires. We want to feel bliss, we want to feel peace, we want to feel elated and excited and the aliveness. Yesterday when Cam was sharing, I remember just feeling this aliveness in my body that is possible when we have that deep connection to ourselves. And it has taken me such a long time to really allow myself to feel that, because for so long I was numb, I was dissociated. I remember about 5 years ago when I found breath work, it was terrifying for me to feel anything. And then breathwork was a massive catalyst for healing and transformation for me. And in a short time, compared to the work that I had been doing prior to that, in a very short time, stuff started to shift very drastically, very exponentially, because I started to expand my capacity to feel. So when we want to feel these good feelings, we just need to remember that we need to build those foundations of how can I feel more sensation in my body, which is going to allow you to experience more of that intimacy, and also hold space for the things that come up that might be blocking that. So I've just seen some things come through here. All right, so a lack of self-worth and giving the power to the other person. Yeah, and this as well feels like such a deep protection mechanism. All good, Demi. And yeah, it's just really honoring the parts of us that are feeling like they need to protect themselves. Because there's this divine intelligence in these parts that are in protection mode. And and it's realizing that there's nothing actually wrong with you. If anything, there's something very, very right. There's this part that just knows how precious you are, how worthy you are, that it is going to do whatever it needs to do or whatever it has available to it to protect. And that's a new way to start looking at this. So when we have that kind of feeling of lack of self-worth, we can start to actually see even how that is a way of protecting. When we go deeper into the layers and even get really curious, like, how is believing that I'm not worthy serving me or protecting me? And we can start to see how these aspects and these parts of ourselves are actually, they know how worthy you are, they know how precious you are. Otherwise, they wouldn't even bother protecting you. We only protect that which is precious to us. And not having the confidence to initiate, fear of rejection, not being received the way I intended. And yeah, and see more and hear more of those layers of protection, those parts that are like, I know how precious you are, that I'm going to do what I need to do to protect you. And then these protective mechanisms, this is one of those blocks that we're going to be talking about, is these parts that feel like it's not safe to be seen, it's not safe to be heard. And these are all the ones that I so resonate with what has been shared. Fear of being seen, fear of being heard, what will they think? So much of this comes down to we have needs to be loved, accepted, and belong. This is such a core need. Just like we need breath and air and water and food, we also need love and community. And without that, we slowly and sometimes even very quickly deteriorate. And so we will do whatever it takes to survive, to get those needs met. And so many of us are living in this survival mode and doing whatever it takes just to get through the day, to get through the week, to get that love, to get that acceptance. And so we'll put on these masks, we'll buy into these beliefs and these stories. And even what I've noticed from myself as well is like when I've started to come into more of an empowered state, I would start to become very much aware when I'm kind of pendulating back to a disempowered state in order to connect with someone else that's in a disempowered state. So noticing if that resonates is like I change myself when I'm around someone else because I think that's what I need to do in order to get the connection, the love, the acceptance, to really connect with that person. And I've been doing this most of my life, and I can still even catch myself doing it nowadays. And it's like, what's different now is I can catch it very quickly and like, oh, that's interesting. there's still this layer or this part of me that's feeling like it needs to shift in order to fit in order to connect, in order to get a need met. And when we spoke about yesterday, the pain of those unmet needs, this is a massive one that blocks us from deeper intimacy. The pain of those unmet needs. And so we start to do whatever it takes to get those needs met. And often that means disconnecting from our authentic self, our truth, our power, and putting on this mask or showing up in a way where we believe or we think that we're going to get that need met. So if I do this, then they'll do that. If I show up this way, they'll love me. And that's where we can get really stuck, because now we might get that need met. We might get that kind of perceived love, acceptance, and belonging. But do we really feel that love? Do we really feel that connection? Because now it's like, it's not really us. It's this false version of self that's getting the love, acceptance, and belonging. So there's like this feeling of emptiness inside, this feeling of loss, this feeling of grief, of like this feeling of like losing yourself. And there's so much grief in that, of not feeling like it was okay and safe to be fully yourself. And then you don't really feel the love and acceptance that you're looking for anyway. And so on this journey to opening to deeper intimacy, again, it's just really showing how essential it is to cultivate that within yourself, to really start to do the work that will allow you to be more embodied in your authentic self, so that you can receive the love, acceptance, and belonging. But it always starts within. If we're not feeling it outside of ourselves, how much are we actually feeling that for ourselves? And so there's also what I wanted to speak into is actually fearing intimacy and fearing change and the connection between these. So again, if we have been in this state of protecting and avoiding and pushing away intimacy, there's very likely this fear of it. And when we're in that intimacy, remember, into me I see, we're actually allowing ourselves to be fully seen. And I want to invite you actually just to take a moment here to close your eyes and feel that in your body. How safe does it actually feel for me to allow myself to be fully seen? Fully seen. Everything, all of it. Full transparency. This is me. And what I notice in my body is for a long time, I felt like the terror of that, to be fully seen. And for me, I would prefer to be this false version of self and have that version rejected than my true self, because I can't change my true self. This is me. The false version, the masks, the contorted self, if that gets rejected, it's like, well, that's not really me, so I can kind of blow it off like it doesn't really matter, but it still hurts. We try to cushion the blow and kind of brush it off like it doesn't really matter, or we try to anticipate and prepare, thinking that if I tell myself all these horrible things, when someone else says it, it won't hurt as much. When I buy into these stories and then someone validates that story, it's like, oh, well, it doesn't matter, I already know that. And we try to like cushion the blow and push that away, but it still hurts. That pain is so deep inside. No matter how much we numb out or distract ourselves or try to avoid it, it's still there. And it's actually preventing us from living the life that we truly desire, to having a full life. So the cost of that, there might be some kind of in the moment gratification and ease in that. Like, it's easier just to not deal with it or not to feel it in the moment. But long term, it creates so much pain and suffering. And I always think about, and I often say this, it's like when we get to the end of our lives, and we look back, what are those regrets? Especially when we didn't allow ourselves to live that full life. So the invitation here is, how can I start to give myself that permission to be fully myself, to be fully seen, to fully show up in this life, to live a full life? And I recently had a conversation with a beautiful lady, Ali, on my podcast, and I spoke about how we're so often afraid of what others are thinking of us. And more often than not, they're probably more focused on the same thing. They're less likely to be thinking about what you're doing and more about what they're doing and how that's being judged. And then we get really caught up in our own world rather than like actually living, fully living. And this is really the work that we want to do here, is starting to lean more into being our full selves and really allowing, first and foremost, us to see us, because so often we're looking in the mirror and we're seeing the judgments. We're seeing the stories like, I'm not worthy, I'm not beautiful, I'm not this, I'm not enough of that, I'm too much of this. Like judging our physical looks, judging our personality, our voice. Like we can be so stuck in this judgment of ourselves that we're not really seeing what's truly there. And that's where I was for a very long time. I hated everything about myself, and I told myself every day. And this just kept me more and more and more disconnected, creating more and more and more pain, and disconnection from myself. And intimacy was absolutely terrifying because I was afraid, like, well, what if I don't like what I see? What if they don't like what they see? What if I'm my full authentic self and they don't like it, or I don't like it, and I can't change that? And that was so much easier just to hide. The other piece is like we become familiar. This becomes like the norm and what we know. And I mentioned yesterday about how there's this safety in the known, this safety in the familiar. And as we start to step out of that, it can be quite intense and it can be quite scary. And we can start to notice the ego spiraling a bit and all of the protective parts of you coming on board to try and pull you back into the familiar where it feels it's safe. But it's not necessarily truly safe. Often it's this false sense of safety because staying in that familiar state or that place is actually going to create more pain and suffering. So what we need to do here, and we're starting to move now into like, how do we actually navigate this? How do we overcome these challenges that we're experiencing? So we really need to support these protective parts to see how what they're doing is actually creating more harm. And this is when I talk about embodiment work. This is what we're doing. We're connecting to these different parts, the shadow self, the protective parts, the beliefs, the stuff that is actually deeply embedded in your body. And we're supporting that to integrate, to see what's actually going on. And there are so many ways that we can do this. I won't go into necessarily all of the different kind of processes because it really depends where you're at and what's going to be most supportive for you. And that's why I'm inviting you to share more about what's here for you, what's resonating, what's going on for you. And for those that are wanting to delve deeper, there's the Sacred Art of Loving Yourself, my signature program. There's private coaching where I can actually be with you one-on-one and go into those deeper layers. And we meet these protective parts. We meet the shadow selves. We meet the parts of ourselves that we shame and wrong and push away. And we actually start to meet them with such a deep love and a deep acceptance that actually allows these parts to finally come home, because these parts have been shunned and abandoned for maybe all of our life. And maybe it started with someone else shaming and wronging this part, or maybe we actually saw someone else shaming and wronging that part within themselves. So then we perceive, well, it's not okay for me to be that because it's obviously not okay for them to be that. And so we're having these traumas and these experiences and things that are kind of said or done to us, but then we're also observing, and we are having our own way of like our own perceptions around that. Oh, they're doing this, they're saying this about themselves. That must not be okay. For example, maybe your mum criticized her own looks and felt fat and was constantly saying how fat she was. And then you grow up thinking like it's shameful to have a little extra weight. And then when you have that little bit of extra weight, you're beating yourself up. Things like that. So it might not be necessarily someone said or did something to you, but you saw them doing it to themselves, and then you perceived, well, if it's not okay for them, it's not okay for me. And this is how we start to wrong and shame ourselves, creating that disconnection, which creates this block of experiencing intimacy with ourselves, which blocks us experiencing intimacy with another. And so what I'm going to be doing as well is sending out some prompts for you to go a little bit deeper. But the invitation really here is to start getting curious, like, what are your fears around intimacy? What are your blocks around intimacy? What are the beliefs? What are the stories that are here for you? Again, awareness is your gateway to transformation. Once you can start to see what's really going on, you can start to almost challenge it in a loving way. Like, is this absolutely true? When did I learn this? Who did I learn this from? Is this actually mine? Sometimes even just that, realizing that it's something you've learned or something you picked up, or it's not actually even yours, sometimes that's actually going to be enough for it to dissolve. Like I've said, like, things can shift spontaneously, exponentially. I see it all the time, especially when I'm working with someone. Some things took me quite some time to work out the formula and to really cultivate that inner safety. Like, I talk about resourcing as such a powerful practice, and I've actually got a guided practice inside the Embodied Love app. If you don't have the app, go and get it, because there's so many free resources in there. But there's the resourcing practice that I always guide people through in everything that I do and all the breathwork workshops that we do. And I often tell my story about how it actually took me about 2 years to finally find something in my body where I felt safe. To actually feel safety in my body took me quite a long time. But now when I work with people, it's like boom, boom, boom. Like, it's so quick. And that's what I find as I'm going through my journey. I'm becoming the transmission for what I have moved through and what I have learned and what I've embodied. And then it's so much quicker for others to drop into that and to cultivate that. It's pretty magical witnessing people go through a journey with me over like 10 weeks, 6 months, a year, how much shifts in that time. And some of these things took me a really long time to actually cultivate. But for me, it's just, I knew how essential it was, and I was so committed, and I'm so devoted to this path and this journey. And as I said, like, there's always going to be more. There's still more in regards to safety. There's a deeper level of safety available to me. There's a deeper level of intimacy available to me. I can go even more, like, there's more room to lean into emotions and feel them even more fully. And we get to be excited about that. Sometimes it feels frustrating, and sometimes it can be really exciting, like, wow, the abundant world that we live in. And so, coming back to, I just want to speak a little bit more into the fear of change and how, when there's this fear of change, we can start to notice, like, this is how we can start to pick up on it. Because as much as we can say, I want intimacy, I want connection, I want love, I want this, and we can kind of have these ideas of how that's going to be. Like, how many times have we, like, once I have X, once I have this thing, I'm going to feel this way, and then we get the thing and we don't feel that way. Like, I'm curious how many people resonate with that, because I've had so many goals and desires that have come to fruition, and then I didn't actually feel the way that I hoped to. So, with the process of creation and moving into what it is that you desire to experience, it's like, how do I actually want to feel? And how can I start to feel that now? How can I start to touch that now and lean into that now? And notice what happens in your body as you start to experience that. So I would notice when I would start to feel joy and pleasure and really good in my body, very quickly I would sabotage that. When I would start to feel more connected to myself, connected to my partner, I would find a way unconsciously to sabotage. And remember, self-sabotage is just self-protection. It didn't feel safe for me to be in my pleasure and in my joy, and so I would shut it down. And the more that I learned to love these parts of me that were protecting me, because when you think about it, how amazing is it to have these parts inside of you that love you so much, it just wants to keep you safe. And I had to work with these parts to integrate them, and to help them to see how it was actually creating more harm. Because there is, like I said, there's ways that it serves and there's ways that it can negatively impact us. There's consequences as well. And that's even for what we might perceive as a good thing. There's always going to be that consequence and that benefit. But it's like which one kind of outweighs. And so when we have these really strong, deeply ingrained protective parts that have likely been with you since very early childhood, between 0 to 7 years of life, we've been playing these out and practicing them over and over and over and over for years and decades. And these parts are very, very strong. If we think of like the neural pathways in the brain, these ones are like really thick, really strong. And what we're doing is starting to recalibrate that, starting to essentially weaken and dissolve these neural pathways and strengthen new ones that are more empowering and allowing you to have the life and relationships you want. But we're not weakening from a place of it's wrong to have this, it's bad to have this, you have to go, like get out. We're not doing it from that place. It's coming from actually, I'm meeting you with love, with compassion, with understanding, and acceptance of I'm seeing you and understanding how you have served me. I'm thankful for the years of service you have provided. I see you, I hear you, it's okay that you're here. And if it comes back up, if there's a trigger and the protective part comes up, we meet it with love and compassion and curiosity. But too often, what we're doing is shaming and wronging this part and getting pissed off or frustrated. And even the word self-sabotage, like, oh, you're sabotaging yourself. And we're wronging and shaming ourselves for things that actually we're doing from a place of divine intelligence. Part of you is like, alarm bell, I'm not safe here, I must protect myself. And so coming back again to that fear of change, that's what's going to happen. And you're very likely going to be experiencing a period of time where you pendulate. So as we're shifting these neural pathways, as we're shifting from these more maybe disempowered states to more empowered states, there's going to be a pendulation, and that's just naturally how we will start to shift this. Sometimes it'll be very quick, other times it's going to take a little bit more time, depending on how deep these parts are, how strong they are. And we don't want to rush the process. We often think or have this conditioning around fast is better, but it's not necessarily the case. It's not always sustainable to just be like rushing and running and going at exponential rates. But as we do this foundational work, when you think about a house getting built, the foundation often takes the longest. But once that slab is down, once that foundation is down, it's like, boom, the house goes up. When we think of the bamboo tree, it's in the ground for like 6 years, really going deep into the earth, growing those roots, feeling really strong before it just shoots up and all of a sudden it's up in the sky. But if it didn't have those strong roots, that tree would just fall down. So this is the work that we're doing. We're building those strong foundations, and sometimes it can be a little frustrating. It can be like, when's it going to happen for me? When's this thing going to shift? And we've just got to keep putting one foot in front of the other. And that's the power of community. If you can be in community with people that are like-minded, like-hearted, that are on this journey, it makes it so much easier to stay that path and to really be in that deep devotion and to put one foot in front of the other. Because there are going to be things that come up for you on this journey that pull you back, like, are you sure? I don't know if this is safe. Maybe we should stop. Maybe we should push our partner away. Maybe we should pick a fight. Maybe we should leave the relationship. Maybe we should kind of numb out and watch Netflix or scroll rather than feeling the uncomfortable thing that's here. Whatever, we all have our different ways of coping and distracting ourselves. And mm, Yeah, we all have our way of distracting ourselves, and it's bringing that awareness to how we do that so that when it happens, we can see it like, oh, yep, I notice what I'm doing. Yep, I maybe it's the scrolling through social media, maybe it's the Netflix, maybe it's shopping, maybe it's this or that, eating, whatever it might be. And interestingly for me, I noticed one of mine was actually doing personal development work, and it was such a tricky one because it's like I can kind of go into, well, I'm doing the work, but often I would do the work as a way of avoidance, like just keep learning and studying, and I need to know more, and I don't know enough, and I would use this as a way to stay in my head rather than being in my body and actually feeling. So there are going to be some ways that are very obvious, and then there's also going to be some ways that are maybe not so obvious, and we think, oh, I'm actually doing the work, but I'm actually using the work to avoid something. And it's also okay to do these things. So it's not wronging any of these things. Sometimes it's actually going to be supportive. There are times where I'm like, you know what, watching a movie right now would just be really nourishing and supportive and relaxing. And it's actually okay to take that space and do what you need to do for you. And that can actually deepen your connection, intimacy. What we want to practice here is discernment. Is this of the highest service for me right now? Practicing what does a yes feel like in your body? What does a no feel like in your body? When it comes to human design, what is your inner authority here? And we'll go a little bit more into human design tomorrow. If anyone is like, what even is human design? Never heard of it. I do have a couple episodes on the podcast, and I'll send those out to you. That goes a little bit more into human design. But you can pull up a free chart and see what your type and your authority is. But using these tools to start feeling into like, well, how do I know what a yes for me is? How do I know what a no is for me? Is this of the highest service right now? Because maybe going into a deep embodiment practice right now isn't of the greatest service. Maybe what you need right now is more of like a felt sensation practice or a gentle meditation or just some breathing or going for a walk or taking yourself out for a coffee or having a cacao. Like there are so many ways to support yourself, and it's really feeling into what is of the highest service for me right now. And that's actually going to be one of the invitations after today, is asking yourself, what would support me in this moment? To integrate what we're going through in this masterclass and to just practice actually being in service to self, in that state of self honoring. All right. Mm. Just checking my notes, see if there's anything else I want to share with you. Feel free to let me know at any point what is resonating for you, if you have any questions, if there's anything coming up for you around this, whether you're live or on the replay, just letting me know, and then that way I can actually speak more into these pieces that are coming up for you. Another one that I want to mention is distancing as a way of protecting, which is very interesting when we're really at the core, like I feel like all of us are really desiring more intimacy with life, with ourselves, with each other, really desiring that connection. And we can see how we're doing everything that we can to get it, but how the ways, like our strategies for getting it, is actually preventing us from having it. And that's what I was kind of referring to when we start to meet these parts and we start to show them how what they're doing is actually not getting us the thing that we want, how it's not actually of the highest service. And they start to see that, and then they start to dissolve, and they start to get on board with the new way. But there's this other way that we protect ourselves is actually through distancing, and in a sense like avoiding intimacy and avoiding confronting conversations because it's scary, what's going to happen, like what are the consequences of that? But that's actually where the intimacy is. That's where the connection is. That's where the aliveness is. When we start to have these deep conversations, these conversations of truth. This is what's here for me. This is what is alive for me. And not coming from a place of wronging the other. It's like, this is what's here for me. What's here for you? And noticing around here where there is emotional charge. So if you're feeling emotionally charged, if you're feeling triggered, it's going to be really hard to have that level of conversation. And this is how we know that there is an inner wound, an inner child, an unintegrated trauma, a belief, a story that we're buying into, because there's an emotional charge. And I was actually just having a conversation with a client recently, and she actually asked me, how do I know when it's like I'm getting triggered and it's like my inner child, compared to when is it actually their behavior that is wrong? And it's starting to release like any behavior as wrong or right, anything that someone is doing is wrong or right, and actually seeing through that to that when we're being triggered, when we're acting out, when we're doing anything that's really crossing someone else's boundaries, there is a wound, there is an unintegrated trauma, there is a belief, there's an unmet need. Remember, we spoke about yesterday the pain of unmet needs. And we start to actually realize that, yes, there's going to be part for us to work on. If there's an emotional charge, if there's a trigger, yes, there's this inner wound for us to deal with. Doesn't mean it's okay for someone to treat us a certain way. We can still have boundaries and needs and also do our inner work. But then she asked, how do I know when that inner child is integrated, when that work is essentially complete? And it's really like that emotional charge is going to be your indicator, that trigger, because someone can do something and it can still be like that's not okay, but you're going to notice that you're not as like overwhelmingly triggered by it. There's not going to be as much emotional charge. It's going to be like, huh, okay, that's not okay for me. I'm a no to that, but I'm not taking it personally because I can now see that if someone's acting out, it's actually their stuff. It's not yours. What's yours is your trigger and the stuff that's coming up for you. But if you've actually done that work, doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. That's not what I'm saying here. It can still hurt when someone says something hurtful, does something hurtful, but you know it's not necessarily about you. It's not personal. You're not buying into a story of, oh, they did this, it means I'm not good enough or I'm not worthy or whatever we might have usually believed. That's how we start to know that the work is completing with that kind of element, with that part of self. But again, it's not about getting to this destination, this final destination where everything is just done. Like I've had mentors that talk about how they've had a trauma in childhood, and it's like things can still come up 20 years later, but it no longer prevents them from living their best life, from having the really deeply connected, intimate relationships. So yes, there can still be threads, there can still be layers that are unintegrated, and there can still be parts that are painful and emotions that still arise, but it doesn't stop you anymore from having the life and the relationships you want. And as we meet these layers that arise, even if it's 20 years later, it's like this thing is still coming up for me. It doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong. It just means that you're human. Parts are still going to come up. But what does shift is the way that you relate to it, the way that you respond to it. You're now like, oh, there's another piece here, there's another layer here. Let me go and be with that and tend to that, nurture that, and integrate it. It doesn't have to be this huge spiral that we go into where we're just in it for weeks and months and years, where we're just buying into the story. It's like, I'm noticing this. Okay, let me go and tend to that. What do I need to support me? I discern, I feel into it, and I do whatever it is that I need in that moment. And this is that building of your relationship to self. This is also going to build your level of trust in yourself. I know it comes up a lot. People are always reaching out and sharing that they struggle with trust. How deeply do you trust yourself? As in, how deeply do you show up for yourself when your body's communicating to you? How often do you actually listen and ask, what do you need? How can I support you? And then follow through with that. Are we in self-honoring or self-sacrificing? So all of this work is going to build your level of self-trust. It's going to build your level of self-confidence. And the one with confidence, it's knowing that you don't have to feel confident all the time, but it's like I'm confident in myself to know when I need whatever it is that I need, and I'm confident that I can show up for myself. I'm confident that I can speak up for myself even if it's uncomfortable, even if I'm a bit shaky, even if I'm anxious. I'm confident that I can be the advocate for myself. So starting to also notice what we make these things mean. What does confidence look like for me? What do I think that is? What do I think intimacy is? What do I think connection looks like and feels like? Because we can have a lot of stories and limitations rather than opening up with curiosity. Like, I remember quite some time ago now, I said to the universe, like, show me abundance. What does abundance really mean? And I was guided on this journey to actually see where I was limiting what abundance actually meant. I was limiting what connection actually meant. Because sometimes we can think if I'm numb, if I'm dissociating, if I'm whatever, I'm disconnected. So we're actually kind of putting a label on it of this means this, rather than like, oh, I'm actually feeling maybe a bit of fear or resistance to feeling this deep emotion. And as I'm present with that, I'm actually connected. I'm connected to the part of me that feels disconnected. So there can be both existing simultaneously within you. And we can start to release the stories rather than kind of like, I am disconnected. We're just going to be moving into, I'm experiencing the part of me that feels disconnected, rather than owning that I am disconnected. Or I'm experiencing the part of me that doesn't feel worthy, rather than I am unworthy. So we're releasing the identity and actually moving into, oh, I'm experiencing this. I am the experiencer of this. And even playing with that, you'll start to notice a huge shift. And you'll start to feel more of that connection within yourself because you're being fully present and empathizing with these parts that are feeling afraid, that are fearing change, that are fearing intimacy, that are protecting, that are feeling unworthy, that is feeling that there's something wrong with me because I'm disconnected and I don't have the perfect relationship or the perfect life or the what I'm seeing on social media. There's so much stuff of that we see on social media, what someone else has or is experiencing. And then we make up this big story and we wrong ourselves because we don't look like that or have that. But we really don't know anything about that person. There's really no comparison. You're here to have your own unique experience anyway, to be your own unique self. You're not here to do everything like they're doing it, to have everything like they're having it. You're here to create your own unique, authentic experience, to learn the lessons and do this dance. So I want to start to move into the embodiment practice now. If there are any questions or anything coming up for you, feel free to share in the chat or in any of the posts, and then I can weave it into the remainder of the masterclass. And I'll just remind you as well before we go into the embodiment practice, we've got our giveaway as well. So sharing the masterclass, sharing your experience on the recap posts. This will get you those draws, those entries into the draw, so that yeah, I'm going to be doing some giveaways and announcing the winners on Monday, 23rd of December. So if you want to jump into that, there's going to be different prizes. So this just really helps us to get this out there to more people so that we can really support the collective shift. Because as we start to do this inner work, it actually impacts those around us. It impacts the collective. So the more people that can be tuning in, that can be receiving this wisdom, that can start to do the work, we're going to be shifting the world, and that's really, really exciting. So if you feel called to help get this out there, so appreciated. Is there anything else? And so same as yesterday, I'm going to be uploading the teaching to the podcast, but the embodiment journeys are only available to Masterclass registrants. So anyone watching or listening on the podcast, if you're not registered, head over, I'll pop the link below, and yeah, you can come and join us for these embodiment practices. All right, let's jump in.